This is a very new venture for us. So we have a small but wonderfully formed audience in the hall here, and about 15 people on the Zoom call, I think. So here goes. So I'm delighted to welcome Cynthia Thickpenny, Dr. Cynthia Thickpenny. She doesn't make much of that, do you? But I do, because she did her PhD on Pictish key pattern and spent about 3 days in the museum studying our key pattern panels intensely. So it's quite important for us anyway. And I'm not going to read all this stuff, no, because it would just take forever. But yeah, Cynthia's been researching Pictish things for ages, and has generously given us several very good talks in the past, which I'm often referring to with visitors and stuff, particularly about the riders, Pictish riders, yeah. So she's been moving on from the whole key pattern thing. She's really got into the subject of transmutation, so how Pictish artists would change from one pattern type to another, kind of seamlessly, and which is absolutely fascinating. And with her tonight is David McGovern, who exists out there in the real world as monarchy rock art. Self-taught, I think, stone carver, amazing. He's been commissioned by various people to create brand new Pictish cross slabs, as well as reproductions, would you call them, of others. And you can go and find those out in the real world at places like Fortiviat and Brechin. And his latest creation that's actually out there is at Halkirk, which I've been to see, wonderful. And so these two have been collaborating on the subject of transmutation, particularly concentrating on a stone fragment from Tarbat, known as TR7, because that's its kind of number in the catalogue. But it's a lovely piece, a wreath with spirals in the middle. Anyway, you'll see all that anyway. So, without more ado, I'm going to hand over to them and go and try and manage this Zoom thing. Hopefully it's working.
We're taking it kind of in turns, back and forth a bit. I'm just going to set a stopwatch so I don't talk too long. So yes, I am, as you know, I'm interested in abstract designs that were made in the early medieval period, particularly in this part of Scotland. And this is a major part of my current project. And I think the best thing that I've ever done in my career. And I think probably this background might be well known to people, but here's a photo of the original wreath boss in its current condition, and it was found in the 19th century in the area around St. Coleman's Church at Portmahomack at Tarbat. And later on in the 1990s and early 2000s, a group of archaeologists led by Martin Carver in the University of York found a Pictish monastery on that site. They were with all sorts of physical evidence. They're making manuscripts and metalwork in gold and silver, and also huge monumental sculpture. And so this wreath boss, which looks sort of strange and on its own, originally came from, just waiting for the slide, a large monumental cross slab of this kind of type. And so there's Nig, which is close by in this northern area of Pictish sculpture. And then here's two of David's reconstructions, and one reconstruction and a new new work, so I'll hand over to him.
Yes, so this is my bread and butter. This is what I do for a living, believe it or not, is carving full-size Pictish cross slabs. Sounds ridiculous even saying it, doesn't it? The one in the middle was my first major piece of sculpture at Fortiviad, and I had the great privilege a wee while ago of coming across a tour group being told about my stone. And as I wandered up, the chap just said, come in, I'm telling them all about the stone. So I wandered up and gave nothing away. And I had the great privilege of listening to someone telling you about you and about how I'd carved and designed this stone. It was one of the best moments of my life, and I gave nothing away. Anyway, on this side is the Skinnet cross, which is a cross that I carved as new. So it's creating it, imagining what it looked like the day it came out of the workshop. And that involved finding lots of things on the stone that had never been properly documented before, like hippocamps that no one had spotted, which was really, really great fun. The great thing about these two stones is that they both have elements of transmutation, that I carved onto them long before I really knew what transmutation was, because Cynthia then put the ideas into my head and they became much more fully formed. But there's lots of transmutation going on in here. Oh, can I get that to work? Can I? Oh, there we go. Doesn't show up on the screen, of course, because it's a TV screen. So there's elements of transmutation, going from spirals into interlace over here, going from interlace into saltire key patterns and things like that. But on a very, very sort of basic level, nothing like the level of transmutation that's involved in the object that we're going to talk about today. And transmutation, it's a great word, isn't it? I recommend mentioning it at dinner parties and things. Anyway,
Okay. Yeah, so the photos give you an idea of the scale. They absolutely, the biggest cross slabs, especially those from north, they dwarf you. And yet the details are really tiny. And so the wreath, hoping the slide will change. Okay, yeah. I think everybody knows who the Picts are, so I'm going to just zoom through this. But let me go back. The wreath, if you look at the Fortiviad cross in the very center, there's a circular shape in the center of the cross head, and that may have been where the wreath originally came from. But at the place where it was made, shortly before 800, and it would have been, a large sculpture upright in the landscape, there was only found fragments. And at around the time of 800 AD, there was a massive catastrophe, really, I would say, with a lot of burning, and someone pushed the sculptures down and hacked at them and broke them into pieces. And I mean, around 800 AD, we can guess potentially who that might have been, but it could have been another group of, people from another group, I suppose even another group of Pictish people. We just don't know for sure who was behind that, but that wreath is now just a fragment because of that. So I think we all know who the Picts are, but just, just in case, they're the early medieval people of northern and eastern Scotland and Orkneys, Shetland, and also, I think, in Wester Ross as well. And they are oftentimes talked about as very mysterious and strange, but they were an early medieval people like other early medieval peoples, but they were at their time and parts very politically powerful, and they're very artistically skilled. So they're fascinating to study. And I think we all probably know the art historical context that they're in, but around Britain and Ireland in this time period is a period in our history we call insular art. Insular, it comes from the word insula, which is Latin for the islands, so it's just a nice inclusive term to include all of these islands. And the dominant look of the artwork is geometric, abstract pattern. There are human figures, of course, but you see that in cross slabs and high crosses, like here, a photo from Ireland, metalwork with gold and silver, and then very beautiful manuscripts, which we know were made at Portmahomack in this site. And I'm sure lots of people have a hold of Victoria Whitworth's new book about the Book of Kells and the possibility that was made at the same site that the wreath was found. So Also, and I'm just as a little plug for the other part of my postdoc, there were also a lot of textiles. This world would have been very colorful and furnished, but very few textiles survived, and they also are covered in abstract decoration. And so one of the bits I'm studying, and I'm even comparing it, to the wreath boss and the work we're doing, are a group of textiles from England that wandered over to Belgium in the early medieval period. So anyway, which also have transmutation, but transmutation, there's actually none in this picture here, is when it's a sort of complex treatment of ornament, and everybody in Britain and Ireland was using it, but the Picts went kind of gangbusters with it. That's the only way I can describe it, is they used it very prominently, very heavily, with as many patterns as they seemed to be able to fit in it. And so in order to describe all the patterns that they would get involved, I need to talk about each pattern one by one so that you can get your eye in, so that you can see the change between patterns in the wreath. So the first, this is a snippet from the Lindisfarne Gospels, just so you can see how the patterns look in the wild, and really in color and clear, image, are spirals and interlace, I think, are the two that we most often think of immediately. And interlace is a kind of knotted or plaited pattern that weaves over and under and over and under and over and under itself, and comes in many different varieties. Whereas spirals, they are, as in their name, they are spiraling shapes. You can get very large spirals connected up to little spirals. You have multiple strands coming out of it. They're a really kind of fluid pattern, and quite easy to spot, I think. The third pattern, I can get this slide to change, is key pattern, which I did my PhD on, and I think people shy away from a bit when they're studying patterns or see it. It's an angular pattern, and the lines are actually, they make a spiral shape, but they turn at angles. And this is an image from also close by, and I chose it because it has little bosses in it, just like the wreath boss does, so I thought it made a nice connection, of key pattern, a large key pattern at the base of a cross slab, but nice black and white image so you can see all kinds of different kinds of varieties. It's a very sharp, angular looking pattern. And these little tiny spirals, they can be triangular shaped or square shaped or both, and they're kind of multiplied and arranged with different kinds of symmetry, and that builds up a whole large pattern. So those three patterns appear on the wreath. And those three patterns most often you'll see in transmutation kind of interacting with each other. So this is the original wreath in the National Museum of Scotland. And it is in terrible shape, as you can see, because it was abused, in its biography, its life. But I got permission to climb up onto the plinth where they have it displayed and get my face up right next to it. And David took GoPro photos and videos of it, and we had raking light coming in just like with cell phones and torches. And I was actually able to measure bits and pieces of it, which helped us reconstruct the stone. And by having stared at thousands of other insular artworks, including with transmutation and all these patterns, started in different lighting be able to pick out what was there in terms of just the hints and shadows and bumps and little carving marks. And so I think the next slide is it the reveal? Yes, it is. Okay. So in doing that, this was our final product, and as accurate as we could get it to look what it looked like when it was brand new. So yeah. And you'll notice, if you look at it carefully, that there's a bunch of different patterns, including some very prominent spirals in the middle, but they're all connected up with each other. None of them are on their own. And the way in which we kind of first step in creating the stones, besides me getting up and staring at it about an inch away, is to make a drawing of it. And I was able to get a copy of Ian Scott's drawing of it that he had done, and in his wonderful work. And I having looked at the stone, differed in some ways for certain patterns and also their internal structure and how they had looked like. But it was really helpful for me to get a sense of the scale of it and sort of the foreshortening of it, and was able to create a drawing. So now I'm going to hand over to David again. So
transmutation, yeah, it's a brilliant word, right, and a great idea. And the more you look at stones, the more you see the amount of transmutation going on within it. This was one of the favourites early doors, looking at woodry, because it's so clever. The little drawing that I've done to your right is just to show where the connections are, yeah, within this very aesthetically pleasing design, where we've got spirals and maybe peltas, you describe them as well as at the bottom, then mutating into the key pattern, and from the key pattern up into the interlace, but with that section, yeah, that sort of trespasses into the key pattern from both sections. It's very clever, and it's very interesting to look at. And it's just a wonderful example. It's probably my favourite example of that transmutation.
Yeah. And I'll just pop back to the previous slide. I think it didn't never. So I gave it the name transmutation because I thought it captured what it was doing. It's kind of this magical looking thing, and it is, you know, it appears in art in Britain and Ireland, particularly prominent in this part of Britain, and almost nowhere else in the world, in any place or any time period. So there's one other place in medieval Islamic art that I have seen in Spain, in the Iranian world, and that is a different context related to script. And with in some cases similar types of patterns, a parallel development, but it is really unique and really rare. So it's a really important part of the art historical and cultural heritage here. And it wasn't ever really given a name by people today. We don't know what the Picts called it because they didn't write about what they were doing, or if they did, we don't have that writing. So I had to create all this vocabulary just so I could talk about it. Otherwise, I couldn't say anything. And it hadn't ever really been studied. It had been mentioned in passing, both in books about art by artists and archaeologists and art historians, but no one had really ever dug into this thing that is really complex and really unique. So I just thought, well, I'll just fun dive into this and see where it goes. So I have some animated slides to show you how it works. This is a small sculpture. It's the remnant of a cross head from St. Vigin's, which is further south, and I was drawing on the trackpad of my computer, and so I didn't fill in all the patterns or even go out to the end of the cross arms, but there's key pattern in the entirety of all the cross arms and a big spiral in the middle of the cross, and they are all connected to each other. So the other two cross arms are connected in the same way, and that continuous connection builds up the entire pattern that you see, with a big spiral in the center that I've only drawn half of. So you can also get them in kind of very large panels or rows. So over on with the image of the sculpture, that's just a photo of a section of a sculpture from Miguel, and there's interlace at the bottom, and then where you can see the strands start to change, there's sort of almost like horizontal, it's not a break because there are no breaks in transmutation. It becomes key pattern, and all of those strands connect up to each other. The object on the other side is a scabbard shape, so it's a very small object. It's smaller, I think, than the palm of my hand, and it protects the bottom of a scabbard, so when you sheath your sword, the point of your sword doesn't stab through the leather of your scabbard, and it looks beautiful. And if we zoom in, it's two animal heads facing each other, and they're the kind of ridges on their backs have a line of, it's hard to show you without being able to point at it, but there's key pattern up towards the neck, and a single strand of that then just becomes a kind of a wave scroll, like spirals that look sort of like repeated waves or water. So you can get it in really tiny spaces as well. Let's wait for the slide to change. Yeah. So you can have it over large spaces, in thin rows, in really small kind of interstices and little corners in artwork. So the photo of the fragment behind glass is from Applecross, so that's Westeros, but I believe that it is Pictish. It really belongs in the family of sculptures here, and I think in another bit of research connected it to the key pattern at Rosemarkie and Nig, and I think those three places are sort of connected through their sculpture, specifically with the key pattern. But you can't really see through the glass, so I put an image of George Bain's drawing of the Book of Kells, where you can see there's spirals and then these little interlaced knots that connect them all together. And then the Nig cross slab, I'm going to zoom in, there's a round boss above one of the cross arms, and there's a spiral that spins out and then connects up with the interlace around it. So there's just, so you can see what it looks like in all its different forms. And the wreath is spectacular because all of this appears kind of on one amazing small fragment from what would have been an incredible artwork. So here's a video of the sculpture in really lovely, oops, oh no, sunlight. If I can go back to it. Let's see. Hopefully that will put, okay, could you, if you could help me, thanks. That David took, I think on the day that it was finished.
Yeah, because I've dressed the outside of the slab.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not a stone carver. I do draw patterns a lot. I'm not a terrific artist. I do make textiles, but I knew that I needed to collaborate with David on this, to collaborate with a maker, because I would risk, as an art historian, making my theories in the armchair, that I feared making up ideas or seeing things that were not actually feasible in real life. And what I really wanted to do is the closest thing I could do is hovering over a Pict's shoulder while they were working and peering at what they were doing and getting into their head as well. And their creative thought process, because these were creative and clever people. And so by studying the kind of little tiny details in the pattern, I thought that would be an excellent way in. So I created kind of my own drawing, painstakingly trying to figure out from the evidence, the visual evidence, how everything connected up, the structure of all of the patterns. And this created a quite kind of messy looking sketch, which David really kindly outlined for me on his tablet. And this is the kind of final drawing that we use to make the sculpture and transfer to the sculpture, and David carved it. So now that identify all of the patterns, you can see all of them there and how they connect up. So I'm gonna just, I think, 5 more minutes or so, zoom through all the ways that I've identified. It seems like, and this is not just the Picts, across Britain and Ireland, artists seem to have, it's like they all got the same memo about the strategies that they had to use to break patterns down and rebuild them and connect them. And there are other strategies that artists in sort of Celtic styles that work today use, that I've seen them use, that medieval artists would never use. And I never identified that across Britain and Ireland in all kinds of materials. So these aren't, I don't think these are accidents, I think these are choices. And the easiest one to kind of identify first, and is what, again, we don't know what the words are, so I'm making up names for them, is connecting up a loose end that exists in a pattern already to a loose end that exists in another pattern already. So I'm gonna zoom in, and you're like, what the heck does this mean? I'm gonna zoom in on the sculpture. here. And there's a bit of a shadow, so I've also included the drawing. And if a pattern in its structure is actually just like a very fancy tied up or twisted up shoelace, it will have one end of the shoelace will go in a certain direction, and if you have a pattern next to it that also kind of has a lace coming out of it, you can join them together. So one of these bosses spins out, strand spins out and becomes a kind of triangular little spiral of key pattern, just in a kind of continuous connection, and then that carries on and makes more key pattern on the wreath. So this is sort of how it works on our wreath boss. But you run into trouble if you're, instead of having an open pattern that has loose ends, what if it's just like a glorified rubber band, basically, and it turns back in on itself? There's no openings, it doesn't want to join up with anyone. What do you do? And the first step, I will have to talk about your insights on that too, is, again, I just gave it a name, a corner or an angle join, and it's like an intersection. So in this part of the wreath, there's interlace, which I've partially drawn in blue, and then a key pattern, which I've partially drawn in orange, right next to each other. And that interlace strand it loops back on itself. There's no open ends. It doesn't want to join up. So the artist carves a line of key pattern down and just sort of runs it into the end of the interlace. And that's great. Almost as if that orange line then forks into two and goes in two different directions. That's another way of looking at it. There's different ways of seeing and describing this kind of phenomenon. Or you can make kind of like a side-on collision, I guess is the best way to describe it, which I've called a side join. So there's blue key pattern there, and then one of the strands of the key pattern sort of goes up and becomes interlace. And another interlace strand comes down, and it just runs into the side of the key pattern. And I don't know, David, do you want to talk about, or should I talk about this later, the kind of conclusion we came up with about what this was? Yeah. I don't know if you could hear that on Zoom, but he says he calls most of this cheating. And it is, an easier solution than some, but it does mean that, so for example, I wish I could laser point this out. That key pattern has sort of 4 little triangular units that are mirrored and rotated, and they have to be sort of carefully chosen and arranged, this particular pattern, to make this work. So it's cheating, but it's not easy either. It's just slightly easier than other choices. And I think I've come to my last 2 slides before I hand over completely to David. So the opposite of cheating is doing what the artist did here. If you have a pattern that doesn't have any loose ends, and you don't want to rely completely on just joining corners and sides and calling it a day, you have to break open the pattern, as if in your mind you're cutting one part of it with scissors and releasing some of the strands to make loose ends, which can get really hairy because you have to make sure that the interlace is still interlaced and going over and under, and the key pattern is still has its normal shape, and it doesn't just look like you threw spaghetti against the wall, which can happen really easily when you're doing this kind of art. So if I've drawn over the key pattern, I've drawn something that's not there. If you were having this key pattern in your artwork, you're a Pict, and you just didn't want to do transmutation and you just wanted the key pattern, that's what it would look like, this particular design. And so far so good. 1 interlace strand, they make a corner join. That's pretty easy. Fine. It looks nice. Another one comes down and makes another corner join here in yellow. That's fine. But you still have 2 loose interlace strands that have no friend in the key pattern to join up with, basically, in purple. And they could have just joined those 2 together and created a loop there and then been like, hey, we've done it, we're done. But no, that's too easy. And so in the planning process and in the carving process, It's like they released or they left out or they moved this blue strand that I'm taking away. It's not there. So this, I'm presuming, was happening in their head. Or if they were sketching on the stone furiously with chalk or something before they carved. And they reroute that line from the key pattern, and it just becomes interlace, and then it goes off into another part of the wreath and does something else. So it's pretty ingenious, and this is not something that's like otherwise allowed in this key pattern. You see them in other contexts with transmutation, like bending, and without transmutation, like trying to avoid this kind of chaos from happening. And then they make their side join that I told you already about, that side-on collision. And the yellow line that I told you before was a corner join is not now anymore. It's just a strand-to-strand connection. So that's, at this point, if your hair is not on fire from thinking so hard, I don't know. I think, I felt like my brain was overheating when I was studying this, because we're not used to, I think, seeing this and getting our thoughts around it. So that's me for now.
I would qualify my cheating comment by saying it's largely elegant cheating. But I do, there are moments, particularly in this boss, where I think where it splits into more than two, where it is a little bit contrived. But the examples that you've seen there are quite elegant, and it's great that we've now got a language to describe, all of these things, and that's the real benefit to me of Cynthia's work, that we can describe it all properly. So, how on earth do you carve a wreath boss? It won't surprise you to hear I'd never carved one before. It's not really been done a lot. There's only one other person who's carved a wreath boss, and that's Barry Grove. And the one that he carved for the Tarbat Discovery Centre is more to look like the heavily eroded original. So to carve it, getting into the head of the original carver, is a lot more difficult. Now, obviously, there's a big difference between the original carver designing, the whole genesis of the idea and then carving it, and me trying to reverse engineer what they made, right? So I'm not comparing like with like exactly, but the insight into what was going on with that person, is very real. So the first thing that we did was make some assumptions about level of erosion, right? So measuring this heavily eroded object and then thinking that's the original dimensions obviously wouldn't work. And this was my first stab at really the dimensions of the bosses and the outer wreath, because that was going to determine how the whole thing was constructed. Those bosses, it's not symmetrical, right? And we also don't know what height those bosses were. So there's an awful lot of assumption going on to try and get to the finished article. And this was my first stab at it, so that I could construct something that formed a blank, right? And this, to me, gives the insight into the order in which things were constructed on the original. So I think when the original design was done, I think they've marked out the wreath and the position of the bosses. And I think that is stage one. So as you can see here, I've started to make the space for it and clear some room around it and start to make things a little bit roundier, which is a technical term. So these bosses are, as you can see here, becoming roundier, so that I can start to take this, right, which is Cynthia's, make a great tattoo, wouldn't it? Which is Cynthia's drawing. And this is my process of then turning that into a line drawing. This is the best bit of the presentation, so I hope you're enjoying that. So this is me sketching it on the iPad and then correcting it as well for the bit that's missing at the bottom. So that expands out a little bit in a second. Yep, there we go. And then this is my use of colour to understand where the connections are, much like the wood ray example, so that I can get it into my head exactly how it works. And when you look at something like this, I think the temptation is to go, whoa, that's really complicated. I don't know how I'm going to get my head around it. There is a repetition to the pattern, which is then deliberately broken by the person who designed it, right? So what I mean by that is, if you look at these sort of trumpet shapes, there's a pair of them there, a pair of them there, and a pair of them there, right? So repetition. If this breakout point from the wreath was continued all the way around, it would be quite a uniform construction, quite a uniform design. but it's not. They break out deliberately into what I think is a Christian cross out of that interlace. And because they've done that, and it's closed, we're then a strand short, which is then dictating whether these bosses are double bosses or triple bosses. Right? It's really clever. And that's why I think that the order of construction is wreath and boss positions, then the design of the wreath, which gives them the connection points into the clock face design, and then from that design, you can determine whether your bosses are double bosses or triple bosses. And this is how sophisticated this piece of, a small piece of a very large monument is. So, how do I get that from that? Pencils, lots and lots of pencils is the answer. And I think this is kind of beautiful, right? It's almost a shame to start carving it and spoiling it, because it looks so nice with all this penciled design onto it. And that's because when Cynthia asked me if I could carve this, I said, oh, of course, yeah, we'll have a go at it. Not a clue. And it's really at this point, it starts to kind of look real and achievable. Yeah, and really quite exciting, because I was starting to get my head around it and thinking, I do actually understand how that construction works, thanks to Cynthia's work. So pencils and stencils. And here's me, I'll just rattle through these, because here's me in the early days, starting to make some dust in the workshop and starting to make it look a bit bonny. It then became the star of the workshop, right? Because everyone who visited the workshop went, ooh, what's that? Including a TV crew who weren't meant to film it. So it made a little appearance ahead of time on the TV. And this is me working my way through the interlace pattern, just roughing it out and then deepening it. Just process shots in the workshop. I was sending these to Cynthia to wind her up, because I knew she would get ridiculously excited when I was sending these vertigo-inducing videos flying through the wreath boss. But you can see it starting to come together. Big mistake that I made, is that I made the profile of the wreath too flat. The end result of that is that from the front, the design of this finished article is right. It looks right. The problem is the edges of the wreath are too high. They should be closer down at the level of the clock face. Now I can fix that, but it's not without risk. So I decided not to fix it, before these talks. But the next stage will be to fix that, and get it into a stage where I can take some plaster casts of it. But the design is right, so Cynthia's design is right, but that's one of the things of learning how to carve something that people haven't been carving for hundreds of years, is that you work it out as you go along. Now, this was the wreath carving more or less finished, and I'm starting to work on those devilish little bosses. And the trouble with these bosses is that they've got fixed connection points on the design to what I'm calling the clock face design, right? The background design in the center. But we don't know what the original height of those bosses was. Now we can see from Cynthia's drawing whether they're doubles or triples, so we can kind of see how they start. The challenge for the stonecarver is to get them to helter-skelter round, 3 at a time, and connect up with the right points on the design of the clock face. And that was very, very difficult, as I found out. But thankfully not impossible. Should be moving on. Is it stuck? So just a bit of detail of those crosses. I think they're both very deliberate. Two little Christian crosses breaking out of the interlace. Can you click that one for me? Perfect. So this is me carving one of these bosses. Show some good sound effects. Listen to that. What a great noise. So this is what I'm talking about. I don't know the original height of those bosses, but I've got to guess how I get them to come around 3 at a time to the connection points on the clock face. Great fun. Oh, there we go again. Let's just hear it again. Great fun. Right. So this is getting on with these walnut whips, yeah, of bosses. They're kind of delicious looking, aren't they? Viennese whirls or something. And trying to join them up into the background design, and it's starting to come together. But you can see the issue that I've got right at the top here, where the edge of the design is sitting too high above the background. I need to completely reshape that so that it's got a profile like this instead of like this. And it's not going to be without risk, but it does need to be done. So my conclusion in terms of how this thing was designed, I think that they started off with the boss positions and the wreath. They then did the wreath detail, including those crosses, because those crosses determine whether the boss next to it is a double or a triple. Then they've designed and carved the interior, and the last thing they've done is those boss spirals to come down and connect into the points on the clock face. And I don't think there's really any other way to do it. Next steps. So I need to reshape that wreath so that it's right, because I won't be able to sleep properly until I have done that. Then I'm going to make a silicon mold of it and make some plaster casts for further study, including supplying it to some people I've been collaborating with in terms of the pigmentation and painting of Pictish monuments using locally gathered pigments and binders. And to that end, I'm going to give a plaster cast of each to the people I've been collaborating with. This is a picture from the Cranach Centre, where I challenged Jordan Patrick doing her PhD on polychromy in early medieval sculpture, and Caroline Nicolai, an expert in early foods, but early pigments, early pigment use. And they gathered these pigments, including the black colour was from the burnt down Cranach on Loch Tay. Some of the ochres they were able to roast on site and make into deeper colours, and they painted this carving that I'd made of Kirriemuir II with this, and just brought it completely to life with all their little seashells full of ochres and egg. It was just the most amazing thing to be part of. So the idea is to get them to take Jordan's studies, particularly around sculpture at Lindisfarne and places like that, and bring what she's learned from that into painting this object as well. And that's going to be amazing fun. Okay, this has been a great project, absolutely challenging from a technical point of view, and it's still got a wee bit of life in it yet to run. Okay. Oh, we're on to thanks already.
So I guess do we stay up here for questions?
Yeah. Want to say anything about your thanks?
Oh yes, I would. Yeah, that would be good. So first of all, I'd like to thank House Museum, not just for making this event possible, and special thanks to Alistair and Ayla and all the help with the tech. Thank you so much. But I wanted to thank you, Alistair, and House Museum for sort of getting me started. I feel all those years ago, I don't know if anybody can hear me, I should go back. All those years ago, getting me started as a PhD student in 2014, when I came up and spent 3 days in the museum with a measuring tape. And I remember Alistair and I standing in front of the great key pattern panel that was such a focus of, I was just obsessed with it during my PhD, and have gone on to publish. Alistair, you said, there's something just a little bit funny about the key pattern, and that got me thinking, and we were looking about how it changed from one end to the other and just discussing it, and that sort of, I just took off from there. So I wanted to thank you, and to Grome House, and to lots of folks at the National Museum who helped me climb up on the plinth is quite low, but for health and safety reasons made sure I was safe, and also that the security guards didn't kick me out. And then we're writing down all the measurements that I was shouting out, because I had my arms up above my head measuring this thing with calipers and stuff. So, and to my former PhD supervisor, Catherine, and my current mentor, Heather, and Martin Goldberg and Joe Clements, who really helped with my funding application for this project. And then to Ian Scott and John Borland, who should be there and was there on this draft, so I'm not sure. So John Borland and Ian Scott for their mentorship and their archaeological drawings, which helps so much. So yes, that's all. I don't know if you and to David, who is my yeah.
Now, do we have any questions? Any questions?
Do you think there's a spiritual quality to the interlace and the general design that's going on, the key patterns and the interlace in particular?
Yeah, and I think the big giveaway is the two crosses, you know, which are very deliberate.
Yes.
And very, very obviously, you know, part of the design from the start. I suspect that the fact that the two crosses are coming out of those two sort of main banks of interlace is some sort of, you know, significance. But what that is, I couldn't tell you, you know. I think it's one of those things that we've probably lost. Yeah.
I just think interlace could be a great aid to meditation, couldn't it?
Yes.
I'm sure it is used in that way.
Yeah.
And that hadn't really, that sprang out at me as I was looking at your pictures just now. I'd thought about it before and it became very vivid, seeing what you were doing.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the Hendersons talked about, you know, the loss of that Christian education, meaning that there's a lot of things on sculpture that we just don't see, and they talked about vine scroll in particular representing the Eucharist. And then most people don't know that anymore, but maybe 100 years ago everybody would have known that, and it would have been quite obvious. So I often think about that in terms of interlace, and whether it's signifying something similar, and we just don't know what it is anymore.
Yeah, we should talk about that a bit more, I think. Thank you very much, it's brilliant.
How long did it take you to carve that?
I wish I'd set a stopwatch and actually worked out the man hours, you know, but I didn't, because I'm too busy thinking about how to do it. So, yeah, how long have we been at the project?
We officially, the carving, I think of the blanks started shortly after January 2023.
Okay, wow.
And at that point I was also drawing furiously. And I have to go back into my computer and find all of the files to when the carving of the ornament began.
See, my problem is I've always got loads of projects on the go, so I never really work out how many days it took to do a thing. I was carving skinnet at the same time. So I was doing a bit of work on skinnet in the morning, a bit of work on the boss in the afternoon. So I don't really know how long it took. Got an idea from a pricing point of view how long I think it took, but I couldn't tell you.
And I just, firstly, thank you for adding a new word to my vocabulary.
Great, yeah.
Transmutation. I'm very much a novice on this. I've not read any books on it or anything. I've just, over the years, I've seen various Pictish stones and wondered about what was on them and all the rest of it. When you're carving these, do you ever, or you're looking at them, do you ever start wondering whether there's a meaning behind all these patterns? And for example, you look at them and you see a cross maybe with 3 little circles in the middle. Might you think, does that mean that guy maybe had 3 children or something like that? You know, do you ever try to come up with any answers and why the different patterns are in different positions and why they're connected to each other?
Oh, great question, isn't it? I do wonder, but I'm more sort of wondering about its sort of spiritual meaning, you know, because there's a reason that we're putting up a big cross in the landscape. It's clearly a Christian monument. Beyond that, and beyond wondering, because wondering's fine. I mean, you've got no choice really with Pictish art because the answers aren't really there, you know. There seems to be an unwritten rule in Pictish art that the bit of any stone that would explain to you what it all means always has to be missing, you know. So we're always left thinking, well, what's really going on here? So the answer is, I do wonder a lot, yeah, but I also just enjoy the decoration and monuments for what they are, you know.
Can I jump in?
Of course you can.
Yeah. So I think there's lots of potential ideas about meanings for these patterns kind of in the public sphere now. in terms of their symbolism of like eternity or this or you know, something. I think in their original context, they would have had functions and meanings that may have been a bit different. And it's hard because nobody labeled their artwork handily for us to be able to tell. We have to, again, to look at the context, and it can differ from artwork to artwork. And I'm not a specialist in reading in the Christian symbolism, you know, and the meanings, and I'm kicking myself because I'm blanking on names. But there have been studies in terms of numbers of things, so 3 bosses, or relating to things like, or if there's, you know, the number of wounds that were on Christ's body when he was crucified, or not being more than 3, obviously, in that case. When I think it might differ from artwork to artwork, but when I went down to England to look at crosses at Sandbach, and one of them has transmutation right the way up one side. It's a freestanding cross, so it just looks, it's not a slab. And so right up one side of the cross, there's transmutation. And on that site, there was a lot of imagery having to do with resurrection and ascension and other patterns kind of related to, you know, the power of Christ to save you, basically, in that process, and human figures too that were still telling that story, New Testament imagery and other things. This is in cold storage in my brain because this was in 2022 when I went down, but I did wonder if the transmutation moving upwards towards the head of the cross might link in with that, but it's totally speculative. You know, I might be making up stuff that meaning that's...
Some of the carvings are sort of pre-Christian as well. There could still be meanings from the Pictish time when they were pagan, because you still got some of the pagan symbols on the stones as well.
There was no transmutation yet in the early but there were spirals, so that spiral pattern is old.
The balls, I mean, on the Rosemarkie stone, you've got the double disc and Z rod that's on the back. It's got the balls in it, which you've not got the carvings on it, but it's the same basic shape. Yeah. That's just been adapted. I mean, it's just the evolution of things, isn't it, from an artistic point of view?
Exactly, yeah. So it's a knotty problem that I think, short of time traveling or finding some really excellent manuscript that explains things, I wish we would. It would be helpful, yeah.
But that's part of what makes it nice.
Yeah, I think so.
When I take people around the museum quite often, they say, what does it mean? And you say, well, what do you want it to mean? Almost, you know, you can come up with your own suggestion because you're going to be as right as anybody else.
It's okay to wonder, isn't it?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know.
Hello, I've got some questions from the Zoom participants. Diane asks, where do you think that the idea of having a wreath came from in art history terms?
The $1 million question. I don't. The short answer is I don't know. My best educated guess at the moment on the fly is that the center of the crosshead is often a circle that has designs in it, oftentimes spirals. And there is a tendency, liking in this part of Pictland, have very pronounced bosses and highly three-dimensional sculpture. And I wonder if those two ideas crash together. But I would need to jump back into the Henderson's Art of the Picts book for identifying the potential importance of a wreath itself. So you've caught me out in the research I'm still doing, so I'll look into it. So watch this space, I guess.
Thank you. This is probably an unanswerable question. Well, I'm sure it is really. Was there only one wreath on the monument, or possibly 2 or more?
Who should take this?
Yeah. I can only answer in the context of a conversation we had earlier, because there is another wreath that's not as complex, and who knows, it may come from one of the cross arms, it may come from a cross on the other side of the monument. We just don't know.
Yes, that's right. It's called, it's TR, is it TR2? I can't remember now. It's in the Portmahomack catalogue of sculpture anyway, yeah. And actually I did wonder if that was the one you were going to talk about first of all. So it was a good job I checked with you, and you told me it was TR7, yeah. Now let me just have a look. I don't think there are any other actual questions here. But a very nice comment from Liz's iPad. I'm sure it's Liz herself, really. Who says, a very interesting session which will help us to look at the sculptures differently. So that's a thank you from Liz, who's in Dunbar. Yeah, no, I have no other questions. So rather than come up there and invade your space, I'm going to say a huge thank you to both of you from here at the back of the room. Been a fascinating talk about a fascinating object, you know. I was asking earlier on whether it was going to be for sale, and but I don't think I could afford it anyway. So.
Well, I did say that plaster casts would be available.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. So yes, thank you. We're having a little workshop tomorrow, which is going to be very interesting, Cynthia's going to put us through our paces, I suspect, at trying to draw things. She's probably going to be very challenging, but we'll see. Yeah, thank you both for coming all the way up here and giving us a super evening. And at that point, I think I'll just check for any other questions. No, I don't think so. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording, and there we go. I don't know how I do that. How do I do that?